History is not ruled by the kindest people, it is ruled by the people who understood one brutal truth: an enemy left unfinished eventually returns stronger, smarter, and far more dangerous than before. Welcome to Career Canvas Power, where transformation becomes your identity. Here, we turn knowledge into real power for your life. Power is not maintained by emotion alone. It is maintained by clarity, control, and the ability to understand danger before it grows beyond control. Throughout history, countless rulers, leaders, warriors, and powerful individuals lost everything because they misunderstood one simple truth: an unresolved threat does not disappear with time. In many cases, it becomes stronger. Human beings remember humiliation deeply, especially when pride, ambition, or authority are damaged. This is why the struggle for power has always demanded difficult decisions. Law 15 teaches that when a serious conflict becomes unavoidable, hesitation can create future disaster. A person who is stopped halfway often returns with greater patience, intelligence, and determination. The world of power rewards those who think long-term, not those who seek temporary comfort. This law is not about meaningless cruelty. It is about understanding consequences. If instability is allowed to survive, peace never truly exists. Strong leaders understood that lasting stability sometimes requires complete resolution before chaos spreads further. Every great empire, kingdom, and powerful institution survived because its leaders understood the danger of unfinished battles. A serious enemy is not simply someone who opposes you today. A serious enemy is someone capable of threatening your future tomorrow. History repeatedly shows that partial victories create hidden danger, because they allow resistance to survive beneath the surface. Many leaders celebrated too early after defeating opponents, only to watch those same opponents return later with stronger strategy and greater ambition. Power requires certainty. The moment uncertainty enters a conflict, stability begins to weaken. This is why decisive people do not leave dangerous situations unresolved. If action becomes necessary, they act fully instead of emotionally hesitating halfway. They understand that fear, rivalry, and ambition do not disappear just because a battle temporarily ends. Human beings naturally seek opportunities to regain lost pride and influence. That is why weak leadership often creates repeated conflict, while strong leadership creates finality. Law 15 teaches that if a threat is truly dangerous, it must lose not only the current battle, but also the ability to continue the fight in the future. Because the enemy who still believes in tomorrow remains dangerous today. The deeper idea behind Law 15 is simple but ruthless: unresolved danger grows over time. Many people think surviving one victory means the problem has ended, but real power comes from understanding what happens after the battle. A person who experiences defeat often begins learning from failure, instead of surrendering to it. Defeat can sharpen focus, increase patience, and create emotional discipline. This is why incomplete conflict becomes risky. The opponent who once acted carelessly may later return with preparation, intelligence, and stronger motivation. Powerful people understand this psychological transformation clearly. They know that pressure changes people. Pain changes people. Failure changes people. This law also applies beyond enemies and competition. In life, every weakness ignored repeatedly becomes harder to control later. A small lie becomes betrayal. A temporary distraction becomes addiction. A minor problem becomes a permanent crisis when left unresolved for too long. Most people suffer not because problems are impossible to solve, but because they delay difficult action until the situation becomes dangerous. Strong individuals think differently. They solve issues at the root instead of treating symptoms temporarily. They understand that stability comes from decisive resolution, not emotional avoidance. At the same time, Law 15 is not teaching blind aggression. It teaches strategic thinking. The goal is not destruction for pleasure, the goal is preventing future instability. Real power belongs to people who stay calm under pressure, think long-term, and remove threats before those threats gain momentum again. Because in the world of leadership, business, ambition, and survival, unfinished conflict rarely stays unfinished forever. The core principle behind this law is that half measures create long-term instability. When a conflict begins, uncertainty becomes dangerous, because unclear endings invite future resistance. Many people make the mistake of weakening a problem instead of ending it completely. They delay decisions, avoid confrontation, or settle for temporary peace, believing the danger has disappeared. But unresolved threats rarely stay quiet forever. In power, leadership, business, and even personal life, unfinished struggles slowly grow beneath the surface, until they return at the worst possible moment. This is why strong individuals value decisive action. They understand that hesitation often creates more suffering than clarity ever does. Mercy without control can also become risky because kindness without boundaries sometimes encourages further attacks instead of respect. Powerful people do not allow confusion to continue endlessly. They create stability by removing uncertainty and establishing control before chaos spreads further. The lesson of this law is not emotional aggression, it is understanding that lasting peace usually comes from complete resolution, not temporary escape. One of the deepest psychological truths behind Law 15 is that human beings rarely forget humiliation. Physical defeat may fade with time, but wounded pride often remains alive for years inside a person's mind. When someone feels embarrassed, rejected, ignored, or publicly defeated, their emotions begin changing quietly. Some people break under pressure, but others become obsessed with proving themselves again. This obsession can make them far more dangerous than before, because now they are driven not only by ambition, but by emotion. Pain sharpens memory. Pain increases focus. Pain teaches patience. A person who once acted emotionally may later return with discipline and careful planning, because suffering forced them to grow stronger internally. This is why wise leaders never underestimate someone who has experienced humiliation. Human psychology becomes unpredictable when pride is damaged deeply. Many people spend years waiting for the right moment to recover status, respect, or control. They may appear calm externally while silently carrying anger within themselves. History repeatedly shows that some of the most dangerous opponents were people who were once ignored, insulted, or underestimated. Emotional wounds can become powerful motivation. At the same time, this law teaches another important lesson: never allow your own emotions to control your decisions. If anger blinds strategy, you lose clarity. True power comes from understanding emotions without becoming controlled by them. Strong people study psychology carefully because they know that every conflict is fought not only through action, but also through pride, fear, memory, and human ego. The strategic reality of power is that a surviving opponent often becomes more intelligent after failure. Victory sometimes makes people careless, but defeat forces people to analyze their mistakes deeply. A person who loses once begins observing everything more carefully: your habits, your weaknesses, your emotions, your blind spots, and your patterns. This is why dangerous opponents should never be underestimated simply because they failed in the past. Failure can become training for future success. Many powerful individuals throughout history became stronger only after experiencing painful defeat first. They returned more patient, more disciplined, and more prepared than before. Strategic thinkers understand that time itself can strengthen a surviving threat. The longer a conflict remains unresolved, the more opportunities exist for recovery, alliances, planning, and revenge. This is why intelligent leaders focus on long-term security instead of temporary victory. They do not become emotionally satisfied after winning one battle. They think about future consequences. They ask themselves whether the danger has truly ended or merely paused for a moment. This lesson also applies to everyday life. If you repeatedly ignore the source of stress, weakness, distraction, or negativity, it slowly gains control over your future. Problems left unresolved rarely become smaller on their own. Strong individuals understand the importance of final decisions, emotional discipline, and strategic timing. They remove instability before it grows into crisis. At the same time, they avoid unnecessary destruction because true strategy is based on control, not chaos. The deepest lesson of Law 15 is not blind ruthlessness, It is understanding how future danger develops and stopping it before it becomes powerful enough to threaten everything you have built. The deeper meaning of Law 15 goes far beyond physical destruction. In the modern world, power is often destroyed psychologically, socially, financially, or strategically long before physical force is ever needed. Crushing completely does not always mean harming a person directly. Sometimes it means removing their influence, weakening their credibility, cutting off their resources, or taking away their ability to challenge you again. Real power comes from controlling the future, not merely winning one moment. Strong leaders understand that threats survive through support, attention, confidence, and opportunity. Once those things disappear, resistance slowly loses strength on its own. This law also applies internally within your own life. Your greatest enemies are not always people. Sometimes they are fear, laziness, distraction, addiction, insecurity, or self-doubt. If these weaknesses are controlled temporarily instead of permanently disciplined, they continue returning again and again. Many people live trapped in repeated cycles because they never remove the root cause of their problems. They fight symptoms while protecting the source. Law 15 teaches the importance of complete resolution. If you truly want stability, growth, and peace, then you must stop allowing destructive patterns to keep re-entering your life. Strong people protect their future by removing what repeatedly threatens it. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte is one of history's clearest examples of the danger of incomplete victory. After years of war across Europe, Napoleon was finally defeated in 1814 by a coalition of powerful nations. His enemies had the chance to remove his influence permanently, but instead they made a critical mistake. They showed mercy without fully removing his power. Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba, yet he was still allowed status, identity, and loyal followers. On the surface, the conflict appeared finished. But beneath that temporary peace, ambition was still alive. Napoleon understood human psychology, political weakness, and the loyalty he still inspired among soldiers and citizens. He waited patiently for the right opportunity. Then he escaped from exile and returned to France, where thousands immediately supported him again. His return shocked Europe because the nations that defeated him believed the threat had already ended. Instead, Europe was dragged back into instability and war during the famous 100 Days. One incomplete decision created another massive conflict. Only after Napoleon's final defeat at Battle of Waterloo did his enemies fully understand the lesson of Law 15. This time they removed every realistic chance of return by sending him to the remote island of St. Helena under strict control. The deeper lesson is powerful. Dangerous ambition does not disappear simply because a person loses once. If influence, opportunity, or hope for recovery still survives, conflict can begin again unexpectedly. Many people create future disasters because they mistake temporary silence for permanent defeat. History repeatedly proves that unresolved threats often return stronger, when given enough time and opportunity. According to historical and biblical accounts discussed in the 48 Laws of Power, Moses understood that leadership cannot survive if rebellion is allowed to spread freely. During his leadership, certain groups openly challenged his authority and attempted to weaken the unity of the people. Moses recognized that these rebellions were not small disagreements, they were direct threats to stability, order, and survival. He understood an important truth about leadership: once rebellion gains momentum, fear and uncertainty begin spreading rapidly among followers. If decisive action is delayed too long, authority itself starts collapsing from within. Because of this understanding, Moses acted firmly against those leading rebellion. He removed the source of instability before it could grow into larger chaos. His actions were severe, but they sent a clear message that leadership must remain strong during moments of disorder. As a result, his authority remained stable and future uprisings were prevented from spreading easily among the people. This example teaches a deeper lesson about human behavior and power. Small acts of instability become larger when ignored repeatedly. One tolerated act of betrayal often encourages more betrayal. One ignored challenge can slowly weaken discipline, structure, and trust. Strong leadership sometimes requires difficult decisions, because hesitation during crisis often creates even greater suffering later. At the same time, the lesson is not about cruelty for its own sake. It is about protecting stability before disorder becomes uncontrollable. In everyday life, this principle applies everywhere. If toxic influences, destructive habits, or repeated problems are allowed to remain unchecked, they eventually grow powerful enough to damage everything around them. Wise people understand that problems are easiest to solve in their early stages. Once chaos spreads deeply, restoring order becomes far more painful and complicated. One of the most important lessons of Law 15 is that danger rarely disappears simply because it becomes quiet. Many people relax too early after winning a battle, solving a problem, or defeating competition. But experienced leaders understand that silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes silence is preparation. A wounded opponent often becomes more careful, observant, and emotionally driven than before. This is why intelligent people never underestimate humiliation, pride, or ambition. Human beings fight hardest when they believe they have something important to recover. Half victories create unstable situations because they leave space for future resistance to grow again. Strong people focus on complete resolution instead of temporary comfort. They remove the ability of threats to rise again by acting decisively and strategically. True stability comes when uncertainty is eliminated, not ignored. The deeper key to power is understanding that long-term control is built through clarity, preparation, and finality, rather than emotional reactions or short-term success. Like every law of power, Law 15 becomes dangerous when misunderstood or used without wisdom. Many people hear the phrase, "crush your enemy completely," and immediately associate it with uncontrolled aggression or cruelty. But blind destruction is not real power. In fact, excessive ruthlessness often creates fear, hatred, and unnecessary resistance. A person who attacks everyone emotionally eventually damages their own reputation more than their opponents. History is full of rulers who became so obsessed with eliminating threats that they created even greater instability around themselves. Fear may force temporary obedience, but constant fear also creates hidden resentment. Overreaction can turn small disagreements into lifelong conflicts that never needed to exist in the first place. This is why strategy matters more than emotion. Powerful individuals remain calm and measured even during conflict. They study the situation carefully before deciding how much force or pressure is actually necessary. Sometimes a threat is real and dangerous. Other times it is only temporary frustration or wounded ego. Misjudging this difference can lead to cruelty without purpose. True strength comes from control, discipline, and intelligent decision-making. The goal of this law is not destruction for satisfaction. The goal is protection, stability, and preventing future danger. Once emotion takes control of strategy, power begins turning into chaos. Wise people understand that ruthlessness without direction eventually destroys trust, reputation, and long-term influence. The highest level of understanding this law comes from realizing that not every enemy must be destroyed completely. Weak-minded people believe power means crushing everyone around them, but true masters of strategy understand balance and timing. There are situations where total destruction creates more problems than peace. Sometimes a weak enemy collapses naturally over time without requiring extreme action. Pressure, failure, isolation, or loss of support may slowly weaken them more effectively than direct confrontation ever could. In other situations, excessive punishment creates sympathy for opponents and damages your own image publicly. When people begin viewing the enemy as a victim, the balance of power can suddenly change against you. This is why intelligent leaders understand the value of control over unnecessary aggression. Sometimes reconciliation creates greater long-term stability than endless conflict. A former enemy who respects your strength may eventually become useful, loyal, or cooperative. Turning hostility into alliance can remove future instability far more effectively than permanent war. Strategic people always think about consequences beyond the present moment. They ask themselves whether destruction is truly necessary or whether control alone can solve the problem. The deepest lesson here is awareness. Some enemies are dangerous enough that they must be neutralized completely before they threaten stability again. Others can be managed through boundaries, diplomacy, or strategic pressure. True mastery lies in recognizing the difference. A person who attacks every challenge with maximum force eventually creates exhaustion and chaos around themselves. But a person who understands when to strike hard and when to remain patient develops lasting influence. Real power is not emotional violence. Real power is the ability to choose the right response for the right situation at the right time. Law 15 becomes truly valuable when applied wisely in real-life situations. The first practical lesson is to stop leaving serious problems unresolved. Many people continue suffering because they repeatedly avoid difficult decisions. They allow toxic relationships, destructive habits, unhealthy environments, or repeated mistakes to remain in their lives for too long. Temporary solutions create temporary peace, but the same problem eventually returns again. Strong individuals focus on removing the root cause, instead of endlessly fighting symptoms. They create clear boundaries, make firm decisions, and protect their future stability carefully. At the same time, they avoid unnecessary cruelty or emotional revenge, because their goal is control, not destruction. This law teaches the importance of decisiveness, emotional discipline, and long-term thinking. If something repeatedly threatens your peace, focus, confidence, or future, deal with it fully before it grows larger. Stability is built by solving problems completely, not by escaping them temporarily. Law 15 teaches one of the harshest but most important truths about power: unfinished conflict often becomes future danger. A weakened enemy may disappear temporarily, but if the ability or desire to fight still survives, the threat is never truly gone. History repeatedly shows that people who are underestimated, humiliated, or only partially defeated often return with greater preparation, patience, and determination. This is why powerful leaders always think beyond the present moment. They focus not only on winning today's battle, but also on preventing tomorrow's instability. At the same time, the deepest wisdom of this law is balance. Not every situation requires destruction, and not every opponent deserves total war. True mastery comes from understanding when decisive force is necessary and when control, diplomacy, or reconciliation creates greater stability. The purpose of this law is not cruelty for pleasure. It is the prevention of future chaos. Strong people understand that unresolved danger slowly grows over time, while decisive action creates clarity and peace. This law also applies internally. Fear, weakness, distraction, and destructive habits become powerful when ignored repeatedly. If you want growth, leadership, confidence, and stability, you must learn to deal with problems at their root instead of postponing them endlessly. Because in life, the things left unfinished today often return tomorrow with greater strength. Thank you. Remember, real power comes from understanding and applying. Stay connected with Career Canvas Power, your transformation continues.